The Progressive and New Deal eras in American history brought about sweeping changes and reforms, bringing social opportunity to some segments of the population while leaving others behind. Women played a fundamental role in the initiation of social movements and the passing of legislation during these times. The following is a look at how progressivism and the New Deal affected the role and voice of women in America. The roots of progressivism extend back beyond the turn of the 20th century. The philosophy of progressivism engendered a feeling of optimism about the future and the role of government, and a scientific, pragmatic approach to problem solving. The progressives were by no means a united, homogeneous group. The interests of African Americans, immigrants, laborers, farmers, and women rarely aligned to the point of cooperation, let alone unity. For women, a number of seemingly spontaneous social movements flourished during the early 20th century. Fashion became less about one's place in a social hierarchy and more about a statement of personal liberation. The flapper persona went beyond finger waves and short dresses to include defiance of social taboos like smoking. The new woman also took control of her own destiny by exercising reproductive control. Many women felt trapped by the yearly cycle of childbirth and continuous child rearing. Women like Margaret Sanger and Emma Goldman distributed information and services related to contraception and abortion at great personal risk. This power of self-determination gave strength to the spreading wave of feminism. Another grassroots movement that came to life in this time was the settlement house. Growing squalor in urban centers prompted women like Jane Addams to establish places like Hull House in Chicago in 1889. These homes were places of education, ministering, and enrichment for the largely immigrant populations who labored in steel mills and manufacturing plants. Wealthy women taught reading, housekeeping skills, and how to be a good American citizen. Many of these grassroots movements contributed to big top-down legislative initiatives. Progressives, with women at the front, led the temperance movement, insisting that alcohol was a morally destructive force and the cause of familial strife and abuse. The efforts of these municipal housekeepers led to the ratification of the 18th Amendment in 1919, which banned the sale or possession of alcohol. The next amendment to the Constitution was the result of decades of fighting. Suffragettes faced ridicule, beatings, and arrest wherever they demonstrated. Different women's groups lobbied everyone from their local communities to the White House for the vote. The 19th Amendment was passed in 1920, finally granting suffrage to American women. Women had fought for labor reforms for years, but it took a national tragedy to bring the nation to action. In the early 1900s, employment options for women were limited to a handful of service and manufacturing jobs. Working conditions were uncomfortable, even dangerous, and nowhere was this made more clear than in the Triangle Shirtwaist Company disaster in 1911. A fire in the New York garment factory killed 146 people, mostly young women working as seamstresses. The national outrage at the deaths, which could have been prevented by any one of a number of safeguards, prompted the passing of dozens of laws regulating working conditions. A few years after the Progressive era, the country was in the grips of a Great Depression. Unemployment topped 30% in some areas, families lost their homes, and children went to bed hungry. The optimistic momentum of the various women's movements evaporated as the nation focused on putting its men to work. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt sought to cure America's ails with his New Deal, an activist approach to fixing the economy and putting people, predominantly men, back to work. Women still found their way into the role of the reformer, but usually alongside or in the shadow of their husbands. Union members on strike were supported by wives who budgeted and stretched savings to make ends meet. Even the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, used her position to advance her own agenda, as well as lobby for her husband's interests. Women similarly found themselves considered second by legislation passed during the New Deal. Public works projects generally benefited women by association rather than by design. Still, a husband at work with the Tennessee Valley Authority or the Public Works Administration allowed a homemaker to focus on raising children without fear of losing their home. A notable exception was the Works Progress Administration, which attempted to provide work for women who needed it. The 21st Amendment to the Constitution, passed in 1933, repealed the 18th Amendment, ending the prohibition of alcohol that the temperance movement had fought for during the Progressive era.
With the downfall of Prohibition, the lid is off.
In 1936, the Rural Electrification Act gave many poor families access to electricity. Homes could be illuminated by light bulbs instead of candles, and refrigerators would allow longer storage of perishable foods. These resources would grant the enterprising housewife greater power over her family's financial future. The legacies of the Progressive and New Deal eras are ones of shifting social and political values, especially when viewed through the lens of women's status and opportunity. The Progressive era brought women out of the House and onto the national stage, and their organized efforts led to organic social reforms as well as great legislative landmarks. The work of women like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Alice Paul can still be seen today. The Equal Rights Amendment, authored by Paul in 1923, was never passed into law, but has been put up for votes in Congress as recently as March of 2013. During the New Deal era, however, Americans were distracted by economic troubles and forgot about the problems of women. New Deal legislation benefited women only as much as it benefited men, but it gave the nation the infrastructure to flourish after the Second World War, opening the door for rapid economic growth and the social reforms that followed. One could argue that the seeds of women's liberation were sown during the Progressive era and watered during the New Deal, to be harvested after the war and beyond.